My thoughts on the Septuagint, there we go, we can end with that. My thoughts are that we've missed the boat with the Septuagint. What happened? Where'd it go? Why did we stop using it? I know why. Because of scholasticism in the 15th century. And because the Lutherans, were students of scholasticism. And it was a good thing to learn the Hebrew, but Luther, when he translated the Bible, translated the Hebrew. And the Septuagint just sort of got, not dropped. I mean, they were scholastic enough that they still knew it and they engaged it. But over time, it just kind of got dropped. So, if you don't know what the Septuagint is, the Greek version of the Old Testament. It is older than the Hebrew version of the Old Testament if we are talking about paper, right? If we're talking about copies of what we have, it is older by over a millennium. Almost 1,500 years older. It is so much older. It is also, interestingly, different. Not in a, there is no Trinity or, there is no Messiah, David was a bad guy kind of way. It's in subtle ways. Kind of the way you would deal with translations today. The NIV is different than the ESV. It's different than the KJV, right? Kind of like that. But those differences can matter. And particularly if you're dealing with the inspired Word of God, you want to know for sure, right? Those differences matter. And so that difference is there. And I think the historic view has been more or less that it was originally in Hebrew, and the Hebrew that we have is the original, or close to it. And that then this was a translation, and it reflects the modernizing, secularizing of the Jewish people in exile in Alexandria in Egypt during the intertestamental times. Sure, sounds feasible. The trick is, there's two tricks. One's certain and one's less certain. I'm going to start with the less certain. The trick is that the Nag Hammadi, Dead Sea discoveries of these other Hebrew documents that have been translated, but they're all bits and pieces. It's not like whole things. They found Hebrew texts that line up with the Greek Septuagintal version of Isaiah. So it's not the Greek translation that did it. There may indeed be more than one traditional history of copying the Hebrew. And if you think about the Essenes versus the Sadducees and Pharisees, that kind of makes sense. So that would mean then that there's a Hebrew text that we don't have that is the real Old Testament. The one we have is in Hebrew is a version of it. It's a good translation, perhaps, right? But it's missing something. And then you put this other piece that is certain in this whole thing, which is that when the New Testament quotes the Old Testament, it doesn't just translate Hebrew into Greek and do it on its own. It quotes the Septuagint. So the apostles constantly reference the Septuagint as their Old Testament. Do you think when Paul left Corinth with just the Old Testament and no letters and no Gospels yet, and he left them there with the Scriptures in order for them to have the Word of God, do you think he left them the Hebrew? He left them the Greek. Yeah? And of course they got into the wrong stuff and found Leviticus and said, we have to do this, right? And so they got all messed up on that. But there's something to this thing here. And I'm like, I don't think we should throw out the Masoretic text, which is the shorthand for the Hebrew copy that we have, the main one that we have. I think we should have it. Then we should have it and the Septuagint beside each other, and we should read it all through the light of the New Testament. So it isn't that dangerous if we've got the New Testament as our gutter, right? Gutter protectors and all that. But my hunch on this one is we would find a whole lot more natural typology in the Septuagint. But that's a hunch because I haven't done the study. And at the end of the day, you also must believe that the capabilities of the Spirit to work even through bad translations is what Pentecost means. Right? That's the meaning of Pentecost. And so you need not fear the Old Testament being trustworthy and true. Trust the New Testament and then read the Old in light of the New Testament, and you're fine with whatever English translation you have, generally speaking, unless you got a real, intentionally heretical one. But then if you're gonna go deeper, comparing the Septuagint translations in English to the Hebrew translations in English would be an interesting place to start, as opposed to those Bibles that are just like, we're going to give you every possible translation of this word, so you can just pick your favorite. Like, don't do that. Just take these two histories of understanding the Old Testament and compare them beside each other. That's a far more interesting thing.